Hi, everybody. It's Sharyl Attkisson. Welcome to another edition of Full Measure After Hours. Today, weather control. Man's effort to control the weather is well documented and ongoing. What you're going to hear in today's podcast, as well as in my Sunday, January 18th episode of Full Measure, is probably contrary to most of what you've heard on this topic. For over a century, man has chased the ability to control the weather. From early rainmakers to secret military programs and geoengineering startups, it's very real, it's documented, and it's impacting tens of millions of Americans today. Yet, I found out in my investigation that in most of America, there's almost no regulation of people who want to control the weather. Anyone, even theoretically a hostile foreign actor, can alter your weather without your consent, or even try to change the climate for profit. Before we hear from some of the folks tracking this, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I learned when I researched this topic. Besides the fact that there's virtually no regulation, there are virtually no audits of weather control systems and efforts. No tracking. It's basically an honor system. This opens up to all kinds of possibilities. Your neighbor, or even worse, a foreign adversary, could be controlling the weather or messing up the weather, and it would be quite difficult for you and I to know. And if you think about it, today it's pretty unreal that a hydro plant that works for profit and wants more water to make its plant work well can, in essence, rob rain from nearby. It's actually referred to as cloud robbing in some places, and control the weather with seeding without asking our permission, without issuing a public notice, without paying us. They can alter our weather. Maybe we don't want it to rain where we are, or maybe we live somewhere else where it would have rained if they hadn't seeded clouds up the road a bit. There are even efforts to dim the sun, which when I first heard about that, I thought it was another conspiracy theory. But in my story on Full Measure, you'll hear about how efforts by one company to dim the sun actually led to Mexico banning the practice. And the more I learned, the stranger I thought that the government, it seems, controls and taxes and tracks practically everything we do these days, but not this, hardly at all when it comes to weather control. I think that's just so strange. And as far as the effects of weather control, I think one thing we've learned is it's very unpredictable. It's, in fact, very uncontrollable. Whenever there's success or supposed success in a weather control effort, well, the companies involved take credit. But whenever there is a disaster resulting in the same area where weather has been controlled or clouds have been seeded, they say, well, it wasn't due to us. And don't miss my Sunday TV story, because you're also going to hear about an amazing turn-of-the-century story that happened in San Diego, the first biggest weather control controversy, and maybe the biggest one that ever happened. Wait until you hear what happened after the city hired a rainmaker to try to fill up the reservoir and how that went completely out of control. But for now, you're going to hear from three people tracking all of this today. Florida Surgeon General Dr. Joseph Ladapo, in a state, the Sunshine State, that has moved to outlaw weather control. Also, Mary Holland of Children's Health Defense, who's following the issue. And Leah Wilson, who heads up Stand for Health Freedom, a nonprofit pushing for transparency. First, Dr. Ladapo. Florida's been the center point for a lot of people wondering what's going on. I mean, all across the country, there are theories and discussions and talk. And with all the storms that have happened and people asking whether we are definitely doing some geoengineering, that's not in doubt. But Florida actually passed a law that said, I think you just may not do it. They don't really have evidence. They don't know what may be done, but they just, from my understanding, maybe you know more, the legislators just said, regardless of who may be doing what, we're just saying we don't want it here.
Yes, yeah. So fortunately, Senator Garcia, who's from South Florida, she led that effort. And we are working with the Department of Environmental Protection here in Florida on that law, that legislation that's now law. And you know, it's a complex issue because it's just so weird, right? You had all these people saying it was a conspiracy theory, and then gradually, there's this public disclosure of federal documents of both funding of private geoengineering and also public, federally funded federal activities that comprise geoengineering, and we see things in the sky, and it's like, what is that? Is that geoengineering? Is it just sort of normal or unintentional sort of emissions of things? And so we're actually working right now with some scientists to do some testing in Florida of the air, of the water, of the soil, to try and get a sense of the levels of some of the compounds that have been implicated in geoengineering, just to be able to have some starting point for thinking about a problem and scoping the problem. So that's where we are right now.
When do you think there might be some results? Is this something that's going to take a year, or something that...
It's probably, sadly, going to be more on the several months to a year timeline, just because we're planning right now, and it's, we want to do it in a thoughtful way that will be useful in terms of being able to interpret the results and sort of know which direction to go based on the results. So that's where we are. In addition, the legislation also requires airports to report when they are aware of any geoengineering activities.
Does that include normal cloud seeding, as far as you know?
Yeah,
they would have to.
Yeah. So I'm actually not sure if there have been any reports yet, but that's another component of the legislation.
Now, Mary Holland of Children's Health Defense. What are your thoughts? So even to me, that just sounded crazy not all that long ago, but it's actually well documented. Where are we with that, and why does it seem to be discussed more publicly now than I've ever heard it?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think there are many things that are now being discussed more than they've been discussed in the past. And certainly, I think there is now much more of a public discussion of geoengineering than there has been. So as you point out, President Johnson back in the 60s said very openly at a public address, "He who controls the weather controls the world." We used geoengineering in the Vietnam War, Operation Popeye. There's zero factual dispute about that. HAARP, NOAA are federal agencies that are engaged in monitoring the climate and engaged in geoengineering. There's no real dispute about that. There are private commercial entities that are engaged in cloud seeding. They are creating rain. We know that that's not so hard, either to forestall the rain or to make the snow. Those things, we know that. But does this account in any way for some of the really severe weather issues that we're seeing right now? We're seeing in California and Hawaii, recently in Texas, in Asheville, North Carolina. Does that help to explain these severe weather events? I don't think we really fully know, but we've got to look into this. And if our taxpayer money is actually contributing to these floods and to these outrageous fires and to the displacement and the deaths of these poor camp children in Texas, well, we've got to uncover that. We've got to stop that. So it's interesting. A couple states have now passed legislation to try to prevent geoengineering. I'm not sure they're effective yet, to be honest with you, Tennessee and Florida, because I think the geoengineering occurs at a higher level than the state actually may have jurisdiction over. But I think we need to be exposing this. So we at Children's Health Defense, every Sunday morning on our CHD TV platform, we have the geoengineering report. And we have Dr. Dayton Wigington, who's been sort of an expert in this area, who does something called Geoengineering Watch. We have him give a report every Sunday to our audience. And so that's one of the other major things we're looking at. We're also spending a lot of our effort looking at electromagnetic radiation.
We know about cloud seeding. Are there other forms of geoengineering that are possible or being done, as far as you know?
Well, I'm not an expert in this area, but I do think that there are ways to shift the weather. There are absolutely ways that the government has the right to do, or the control to do, to make certain areas cooler and make certain areas hotter. And so Dr. Dane Wigington's hypothesis is that geoengineering is being used to cool down the eastern part of the United States, sort of east of the Mississippi River, where the most of the American population lives, so that they're not as concerned about this issue. But in the western states, in Nevada, Arizona, California, there are places that are really on a regular basis hitting really, really high temperatures and experiencing fires.
By us not necessarily knowing what's fully going on, at least a lot of people think we don't have all the answers, does it imply there's a secret federal project of some kind going on, or more than one project of such a secret nature?
Well, I think what we don't know about is not necessarily that it's secret, but certainly the mainstream media, the corporate media, doesn't cover these issues. So it's not a secret. The Congressional Research Service has done several reports on geoengineering. This is solar, modification, SRM, solar radiation management, is well understood by Congress as a reality that the government is putting money towards. The corporate media, for whatever reason, whether they're being told not to cover it or it's not in their interest to cover, I don't know. They don't cover it, but it's not technically a secret. I think there's a lot of things out there that are just coming to the fore now. What's actually happening, it's not fully a secret, right? Like the indemnification of the vaccine industry and doctors, it's not a secret, but the mainstream media has never covered that. The pharmaceutical industry sponsors their ads. So I do think that there's a lot going on with geoengineering, and we at Children's Health Defense, because it affects all of us, especially if they're spraying things like aluminum and strontium and barium, as we believe they are, well, that's affecting our food supply. That's affecting the fertility of the soil. That's affecting all animal and plant life. So it has a huge impact. Again, as we said, then how does that interact with fluoridated water? How does that interact with somebody who's just had an injection of aluminum? We don't really know.
And now Leah Wilson, who heads up Stand for Health Freedom.
The issue with the skies and people noticing that there's something different, this didn't used to be this way, is still a huge mystery to a lot of us, but we know something has changed, right? And I think that's what makes the policy change hard, is when you go into a state house and say, hey, we want to stop what's happening in our skies. Like, can we at least protect ourselves if Washington's going to be slow to make change? And the first question they ask is, who's doing it? So can you show them who's doing it? And then they ask, how do we stop them from doing it? And what are they exactly doing? And how do we know it's harmful? So all these questions are big questions that we need the support of Washington to help us answer in order to, I don't know if we can put the issue to bed, but at least move the ball down the field to improve our skies, in the aerosolization of our skies. Because what do we even call it today? Do we call it weather modification? Do we call it contrails? Do we call it geoengineering? Do we call it shielding from the sun? It's just, there's a lot of questions to be answered, but there are some courageous states that have said, we're going to go ahead and pass policy to make a statement that this is not allowed here. Even if they know that we can't fully enforce it, or it's not completely a state issue, the state courts can't oversee it fully, but to go ahead and say that this is not a state where we support weather modification or dimming of the sun, that's a big one. So it's the weather modification, because once we start a storm, can we stop it? It's no secret this technology exists. No one's denying that the technology exists and that it's even being used, but it's who is using it and for what purposes, and can you stop a storm that you start? And then the dimming of the sun. I mean, there's a huge effort to protect the earth from the effects of the sun, and to think that maybe we know better with how to make our planet a more sustainable place to live. And I mean, I don't agree with that. And maybe your neighbor does or doesn't. However, is this something that we should trust other men with to influence the landscape that we get to raise our kids in?
Is that in the record that there are dimming of the sun efforts being coordinated somewhere? Or is that just theory?
I'd have to look into the papers.
Okay.
We've seen papers out of Harvard, and maybe I'd have to look at the two different institutions about efforts to dim the sun. That's a big one that's a big tagline of a worthy effort is to protect us from global warming, from changing climate. So they did pass a law in Florida to say that it's illegal in the state of Florida to modify the weather or to dim the sun. And then they also instructed the airports that they are obligated to report any of these efforts that they know are going on. So they're taking steps to uncover what's happening, to try to stop it in the state of Florida. Governor DeSantis happily signed the bill, but he also admitted that there's more work to be done and that we need federal support in order to actually make a difference on this issue.
And then lastly, I don't know if, when I see the planes, I'm like, aren't those planes tracked? Could you and I go to FlightAware, go somewhere and say, as I'm seeing like 10 stripes, I don't know where they're coming from or going to, but isn't that findable?
There are people who are attempting to document and track these things and then even test the water and the soil in the areas where it's happening. So they'll document the air traffic, they'll document the effect on the soil that they observe and see and test. And where does that get us next? I mean, I just feel like we're still in an information gathering era of this issue, even though it feels so important and so pressing to make change faster than not.
Okay, 2 more questions. The implications are that if this is being done, it's somehow being done secretively by people who aren't admitting it. So that would be some kind of, I don't know.
Nefarious. I think one of the things
or well-intentioned, but just some secret program if we don't know about it.
Which I think the well-intentioned part is what I believe that the weather modification story coming to the mainstream airwaves is an indication that this is going to become normalized or well accepted. That the well-intentioned people are going to tell their story and get the public on board with helping to control what we're seeing. So it's interesting because I think the only reason Tennessee was able to pass a law banning geoengineering, I think they called it geoengineering in their law, not weather modification, but was because those lawmakers there, they make decisions based on principle. They're not asking for the piles of research. They're saying, oh, people are out there trying to play God. We don't think anyone else should play God except God, so let's put a stop to this. So they're willing to pass the law based on those premises. But you go state to state, and even to Congress in Washington, I mean, they're much slower to act. I think that we're going to see a battle of the stories before there's real change on this. Like farmers will say, if we can't get to the bottom of weather modification, then we can't fix any of our agricultural problems. They're like, can you help us fix that first? Because I'll walk outside in the morning. Yesterday, my crops were fine. And today, they're completely wilted and changed in color. Like, we haven't seen this before in history. I'm a farmer. I've been watching my crops. I've been watching the sky. And if we can't get to the bottom of the aerosolization of our skies, then how do I protect my farm? So they're asking for the help.
There's so much more to be said on this topic, and you will hear more in my Sunday episode of Full Measure, January 18th. To watch, go to SharylAttkisson.com and click the Full Measure tab for a list of stations and times, or you can always watch at fullmeasure.news online. If you look around 11 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday mornings, we post the whole program there at fullmeasure.news. And if you're listening to this after January 18th, that's not a problem. You can go back to fullmeasure.news to look for replays. Also, our unadvertised YouTube channel, Full Measure with Sharyl Attkisson. I sure hope you enjoyed today's podcast and that you'll leave us a great review, subscribe, share it with your friends, and check out my other podcast, the Sharyl Attkisson Podcast. Another reminder that if you want to support independent journalism, proceeds from my latest bestseller will do just that. It's called Follow the Science, How Big Pharma Misleads, Obscures, and Prevails. Also proceeds from my store, where I have some interesting and exclusive products designed for independent thinkers like you. You can go to SharylAttkisson.com and click the Store tab. Do your own research, make up your own mind. Think for yourself.